It was a cold evening, and the air inside the old concert hall was still. The lights above the marble floor flickered softly, leaving the long hallway washed in a pale glow. The night guard walked slowly through the corridor, his shoes making quiet echoes that seemed to travel for miles. It was his usual routine, checking doors, turning off stray lights, making sure everything was in place before the next day. He had done this for years. The building had become more than a workplace to him. It was a quiet companion, a place where he spent most of his nights while the rest of the city slept. He knew every corner, every creak in the floor, every window that rattled when the wind blew. It was a kind of peace he had grown used to, an ordinary peace that came with silence and solitude. But that night, something felt different. As he walked past the large hall, he noticed a faint light coming from the far end. Normally, the hall was dark and locked up after rehearsals, but tonight, a soft golden light was spilling across the stage. Curious, he stepped closer. The echo of his footsteps grew louder in the vast room until he reached the open doors and looked inside. There it was, a grand piano. It stood in the middle of the stage, uncovered, shining under a single spotlight that someone had forgotten to turn off. Its smooth black surface reflected the light like still water. The guard blinked in surprise. He had never seen this piano before. The hall had many instruments, but this one looked new, polished, elegant, and untouched. It was as if it had been placed there deliberately, waiting for something, or someone. He walked up the steps quietly, his hand brushing the side of the piano as he approached. The cool surface felt smooth beneath his fingers. He looked around to make sure no one was there. The hall was empty. Only the faint hum of electricity and the soft buzz of the lights filled the air. For a moment, he just stood there, staring at the keys. They were pure white, perfectly lined, glowing under the soft light. His heart began to beat faster, not from fear, but from something else. Something he hadn't felt in a long time. It had been years since he'd been this close to a piano. Long before he worked as a guard, before the uniform and night shifts, he had once dreamed of music. As a child, he had learned to play on a small second-hand piano his mother had saved up to buy. He used to spend hours pressing the keys, trying to match the notes he heard from old cassette tapes. His mother loved to listen. She would sit beside him, eyes closed, smiling as he stumbled through songs. Those were the happiest days of his life, simple, warm, and full of sound. But life had changed. His mother passed away when he was still young. The piano was sold, the dream forgotten. Bills came, work came, and slowly the music disappeared. It became something distant, something from another lifetime. And yet, standing there now, he felt that old longing again. He hesitated. His job was to guard, not to play. There were cameras around, and even if no one was watching, it felt wrong to touch something that wasn't his. But the piano looked so lonely, sitting there in the stillness, almost calling out to him. He looked over his shoulder once more, no one. Only silence. He sat down. The bench creaked softly beneath his weight. His hands hovered over the keys, unsure, trembling slightly. He could feel the coolness of the ivory under his fingertips. He didn't even know what he would play, if he still remembered anything at all. At first, he just pressed one key. The sound echoed through the empty hall, long and pure. Then another. Slowly, a few notes came together, unsteady but familiar. It was a tune he hadn't thought about in years, one his mother used to hum while cooking dinner. He smiled without meaning to. The notes floated in the air like memories returning home. He tried again, this time adding more keys, his fingers remembering what his mind had forgotten. The melody began to take shape, fragile but beautiful. The sound filled the hall, rising and falling gently like a voice telling a quiet story. He closed his eyes. For the first time in years, he wasn't a night guard or a man doing his rounds. He was a boy again, sitting in a small living room beside his mother, the smell of tea in the air, the world simple and kind. Every note brought her closer, as if she were there, listening once more. The hall, once silent, now felt alive. He didn't notice that a few people had stopped near the doorway. The cleaning staff, who worked late some nights, had heard the faint sound and followed it. They stood there quietly, not wanting to disturb the moment. They knew the guard well, a quiet man, polite, always nodding but rarely speaking. They had never imagined he could play like this. The music was tender, full of emotion that words couldn't carry. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. Every mistake, every hesitation seemed to add more meaning. It was as if the piano itself understood his story and responded with warmth. Minutes passed like seconds. When the melody finally reached its last note, the sound lingered in the air, soft and trembling. He opened his eyes and exhaled slowly. He hadn't realized he'd been holding his breath. Then he looked up and froze. At the back of the hall stood 3 people, all staring at him. One of them, a woman holding a mop, had tears in her eyes. The others smiled faintly, not saying a word. Embarrassed, he stood up quickly, apologizing under his breath. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice low. "I shouldn't have," but the woman shook her head. "Don't stop," she said softly. It was beautiful. Her words hit him harder than he expected. No one had said that to him in years. For a moment, he didn't know what to say. He nodded awkwardly and walked off the stage, pretending to check the lights as if that had been his purpose all along. Yet as he made his way down the hall, something inside him had changed. The cold, empty building no longer felt lifeless. The echoes of the piano still floated through the air, wrapping around him like a forgotten dream. He finished his shift quietly, but his thoughts were far from his work. He kept replaying the music in his mind, feeling the warmth it had brought him. It was as if that piano had opened a door he thought was locked forever. When he left the hall that night, the city was still dark. Streetlights cast long shadows across the empty sidewalks. He walked slowly, breathing in the crisp air, the faint melody still humming in his heart. For the first time in many years, he didn't feel tired. He felt alive. The next night, he found himself looking forward to work. Not for the routine, not for the quiet, but for the piano. He wanted to see it again. To feel those keys under his fingers, to hear the notes echo through the empty hall once more. He told himself he wouldn't play again, it wasn't right, but deep down, he knew he would. Something about that piano called to him as if it knew his story, as if it had been waiting for him all along. And though he didn't know it yet, what began as a quiet moment of nostalgia would soon become something much bigger, something that would touch the hearts of everyone who heard him play. But for now, it was just him, the piano, and the lingering sound of a song that had brought his mother back to life for a few fleeting moments. He walked out of the hall and turned off the last light, leaving the piano under the soft glow of the moonlight that filtered through the tall windows. It stood there silently, patient, waiting for his return. That night, as he closed the heavy doors behind him, he didn't just lock up the building. He locked away a memory, a moment that would soon find its way back to the light. And in that quiet, empty hall, the story of a forgotten pianist had just begun. The next night came quietly, like any other. The city outside the concert hall was busy with people rushing home, but inside the building, silence ruled again. The guard walked in, clocked his shift, and began his usual round with a flashlight in hand. The air smelled faintly of dust and polish, and the long corridors glowed dimly under the soft lights that never went out. He told himself that he wouldn't play again. The piano wasn't his. It wasn't right. It had been a mistake last night, even though it felt so good. He had done something out of place, something unprofessional. He needed to just do his job, finish his rounds, and keep to his duties. That's what he had been hired to do. But as he reached the hall and saw the piano again, all those thoughts started to fade. It was still there, standing proud in the middle of the stage. The light above it had been turned off now, but the moonlight coming through the high windows fell across it like a silver blanket. It looked even more beautiful that way, quiet, mysterious, and almost alive. He stood at the door for a moment, his heart beating a little faster. He tried to look away, but his eyes kept coming back to the piano. It was strange the way it pulled at him. It wasn't just about music anymore. It was about something he had lost long ago, something warm, something that once made him feel whole. He sighed deeply, took a step forward, and then another. His shoes made a soft tapping sound on the wooden floor. The hall was empty just as before. He put down his flashlight on the front row seat and walked up the few steps to the stage. The piano gleamed softly under the moonlight. He ran his hand along its surface again. It felt cold but somehow welcoming. He sat down on the bench. For a moment he didn't play. He just sat there listening to the quiet around him. He could hear the ticking of a distant clock, the hum of the old air vents, and his own slow breathing. Then, almost without thinking, he pressed one key. A single note filled the air, soft, deep, and clear. Then another. Soon the notes turned into a melody. His fingers seemed to remember things his mind had long forgotten. The tune was smoother tonight, more confident. It was the same song he had played the night before, but this time it carried more feeling. Each note seemed to breathe, to tell a story of its own. He closed his eyes again. The music flowed out of him naturally. It didn't matter if it was perfect or not. It wasn't about that. It was about feeling something real again. He didn't know that he wasn't alone. A young man from the sound department had come in to check the stage lights for an early rehearsal the next day. Hearing the soft notes echoing through the hall, he stopped near the back and listened. He had no idea who was playing. At first, he thought it might be a late-night pianist, but as he moved closer, he saw the uniform. The guard was playing. He stood there quietly, not wanting to interrupt. Something about the music made him feel calm, almost emotional. There was no rush, no pressure, just honesty in every note. It was rare to hear something played that way, without performance, without show. Just pure heart. The guard didn't notice him until the song ended. When he looked up, he saw the young man standing there with a small smile. "Sorry," the man said quickly. "I didn't mean to disturb you. That was really beautiful." The guard looked a little embarrassed. "I didn't think anyone was here," he said softly. "I was just checking the stage lights," the man replied. "I didn't know you could play like that." The guard smiled faintly, unsure what to say. "It's been a long time," he said. "I used to play when I was younger." "Well," the young man said, "you should keep playing. That was something special." He nodded politely, but inside something stirred again. Those simple words, "something special," echoed in his heart long after the young man left. He sat there for a while longer, staring at the piano. The hall felt warmer now, as if it had accepted him somehow. He thought about how music had once been everything to him. He remembered his mother's gentle hands guiding his fingers, the way she used to say, "Play like you're talking to someone you love." He realized that's what he had done just now. He had spoken through music, even if no one was really listening. Or maybe someone was meant to listen after all. Later that night, when his shift ended, he walked home through the quiet streets, his hands still tingling slightly from the keys. He couldn't stop smiling. It wasn't a big smile, just a small one that wouldn't go away. He felt alive again, as if he had rediscovered a missing part of himself. The next evening, he couldn't help it. He played again. And the evening after that, too. Every night, when the building fell silent, he would sneak up to the piano and let his fingers speak. Sometimes he played old songs. Sometimes he just made things up as he went. It didn't matter what it was. What mattered was the feeling it gave him. Word slowly began to spread among the night staff. People whispered about the guard who played the piano. Some thought it was just a rumor, others didn't believe it. But those who had heard him knew it was true. They said the way he played could make you feel things you hadn't felt in years. One night as he played, 2 cleaners quietly entered the hall. They didn't say anything. They just sat at the back and listened. The melody floated through the room like a gentle wave. The guard didn't notice them until the end, when he heard soft clapping from the shadows. He turned, startled. "Don't stop," one of them said with a smile. "We wait for this every night now." He chuckled shyly. "I didn't know I had an audience." "You do," the other cleaner said. "And we love it." For the first time in many years, he felt something warm spread through his chest, a mixture of pride and disbelief. He wasn't just doing his rounds anymore. He was giving something to people, even if it was small. He didn't think of himself as a performer, but somehow his music had started to matter to others. He went home that morning feeling lighter than air. The piano wasn't just an instrument anymore. It had become a bridge between him and the world he had long closed off. But he still didn't tell anyone from management. He didn't want attention. He didn't want to make a fuss. He just wanted to play quietly in peace when no one was around. The music was for his mother, for himself, and for anyone who happened to hear it by chance. One night, as he was leaving after another short session, he noticed a small envelope taped to the side of the stage. It had his name written on it in neat handwriting. He frowned, wondering who could have left it. Inside, there was a short note that read, "The hall feels more alive because of your music. Thank you for reminding us what real beauty sounds like." There was no signature, just those words. He stood there for a long time, reading it over and over again. His throat tightened. He slipped the note into his pocket and left the stage quietly, but his heart was full. From that night on, he played with a little more confidence, a little more emotion. Each note carried not only his memories but also a quiet gratitude for being heard, for being seen, even if he didn't know by whom. The piano had changed his nights completely. What used to be long hours of silence had turned into moments of connection, even in solitude. He realized that music was more than sound. It was emotion shared without words. And as he played, night after night, he didn't know that his simple, secret performances were starting to reach further than he could imagine. The few who heard him began to tell others. The story of the quiet guard who played with his heart was slowly spreading beyond the empty hall, but he didn't know that yet. For him, it was still just about the music, the way the keys felt under his fingers, the way the notes echoed softly into the dark. Every night, when the last light dimmed and the world fell asleep, the piano waited and he always came back, and with each song, he found a little more of the person he used to be. The days turned into weeks, and the guard's nights began to feel different from before. The once cold, empty hall had become his quiet world of music and peace. Every shift he would wait for the moment when the building went still, and the echo of footsteps disappeared. That was his time. The time when he could sit at the piano again and let the silence turn into song. He didn't play for praise or attention. He played because it healed him. Each night when his fingers touched the keys, the weight of the day seemed to fall away. He forgot about his age, his worries, and the long years that had slipped past. Music made him feel alive again, as if his heart remembered how to breathe. People around the hall began to notice the change in him. The other guards said he smiled more often now. The cleaners said he moved lighter, as if something good had happened in his life. No one asked too many questions. They just felt it, a warmth that came from him. Still, he kept his secret to himself. The piano sessions were his escape, something private and sacred. But the hall had its own way of revealing secrets. One Friday night, a few musicians arrived late to pick up their instruments for an early morning rehearsal. They entered through the side door quietly, planning to be quick. As they passed through the hall, they stopped, frozen, when they heard the faint sound of music. It wasn't loud, but it was beautiful. The notes floated through the air like whispers, rising and falling softly. The musicians looked at each other, confused. No one was supposed to be rehearsing at that hour. They followed the sound and peeked inside the main hall, and what they saw made them stand still. There he was, the guard, sitting at the grand piano in his uniform, eyes closed, playing with the kind of emotion that couldn't be faked. His hands moved gently but surely, as if the music lived inside him. The men didn't speak. They just stood there, listening. One of them, a violinist, whispered, "I've played in this hall for years, but I've never heard something like that." They stayed until the last note faded. The guard opened his eyes and looked up, startled when he saw them. He froze, unsure what to say. One of the musicians stepped forward with a kind smile. "That was incredible," he said quietly. "Do you play often?" The guard looked down shyly. "Only when it's quiet. I hope I didn't disturb anyone." "Disturb?" The violinist laughed softly. "You could make a whole audience cry with that kind of feeling." The guard didn't know how to respond. Compliments were something he wasn't used to. He gave a small nod and started to stand up, but one of them said, "Please play another piece." "Just one more," he hesitated. His instinct was to say no, to go back to being invisible like always. But there was something in their eyes, a respect, not pity. So he sat again, took a deep breath, and began to play another song. This one was different, slower, deeper. The kind of tune that sounded like it came from the soul of a man who had lived and lost, but still hoped. The room fell into silence again, only the sound of the piano echoing off the high ceilings. When he finished, none of them spoke for a while. One of the men simply said, "Thank you." That night after they left, the guard sat there for a long time staring at the piano. He didn't realize how much that small moment had meant to him. For the first time, real musicians had heard him play, and they hadn't laughed or looked surprised that a guard could touch the keys. They had listened with genuine hearts. The next day, one of those musicians mentioned the story to the hall's assistant manager. It was said casually, something like, "You know the night guard? He can really play. You should hear him sometime." The assistant manager smiled, thinking it was probably just an exaggeration. But curiosity started to spread. Soon, People who worked in the building during the day began to wonder if the story was true. Meanwhile, the guard kept playing at night, unaware of the quiet attention growing around him. Each song he played was a piece of his life, his mother's memory, his dreams, his loneliness, his gratitude. The piano had become his way of talking to the world without using words. One night, as he was about to start playing, he found something new waiting for him on the stage, a folded piece of paper sitting on the piano bench. He opened it. It said, "If music could speak, yours would tell the truth." He didn't know who left it, but it made him smile. That night he played longer than usual. The songs carried a little more courage, a little more joy. As the weeks went on, more people began to quietly visit the hall after hours. Not many, just a handful of staff who stayed late or security partners who pretended to check in at the right time. They would sit in the back rows, hidden in the dark, and listen as he played. No one interrupted. No one took pictures. It was their small secret concert in the middle of the night. The guard didn't mind. He wasn't playing for applause. He was playing because it made him feel whole, but he could feel something changing. The music wasn't just healing him anymore. It was touching others too. One evening, as he finished a gentle tune, a quiet voice from the back said, "My daughter used to play that before she passed." "Thank you." The words stopped him cold. He looked up and saw one of the janitors standing near the door, wiping his eyes. The guard nodded silently, feeling his own throat tighten. He realized then that music could reach people in ways nothing else could. After that night, he began to choose his songs more carefully, melodies that spoke of kindness, comfort, and memory. He didn't need to speak much anymore. The music said it all. One night, a sound technician who often worked late brought his small recorder and left it on the stage while pretending to check the microphones. He wanted to capture the guard's playing, not to expose him, but to keep a memory of it. The next day, he shared the recording quietly with one of the concert hall directors. The director listened to it during lunch. Halfway through the piece, he stopped eating. He listened again, this time closing his eyes. When the song ended, he sat in silence for a moment, then asked, "Who played this?" When he was told it was the night guard, he didn't believe it at first. But after hearing more of the recording, he said softly, "Find out when he plays again." The following night, as the guard played in his usual peaceful solitude, he didn't realize that someone was sitting quietly in the back, the director himself. He listened from the shadows, hands clasped, eyes closed. The emotion in the guard's playing was something he hadn't heard in years. It wasn't professional perfection. It was pure heart. When the music stopped, the director approached him. The guard looked up, startled to see someone there. "You play beautifully," the director said. "Why didn't you ever tell anyone?" The guard looked down, unsure what to say. "It's just something I do to pass the time," he said softly. The director shook his head. "No, it's more than that. You have something rare, something real." The guard smiled modestly. "It's just music. I don't think much of it, but the director did." He walked away that night, deep in thought. The next morning, a small meeting was held among the hall staff. The director told them he wanted to do something special, something that would bring everyone together and celebrate music in its purest form. He didn't give details, only said, "There's someone here who reminds us what art truly is." Meanwhile, the guard had no idea what was coming. To him, it was just another week, another quiet series of nights filled with piano and peace. He had no idea that his secret gift had touched so many hearts, or that soon, the hall that had been his silent friend for years would open its doors to a new story. His story. He only knew one thing, that when his hands touched the piano keys, the world around him disappeared, and for a while, everything made sense again. And as he played that final note before ending his shift, he had no idea that this was the beginning of something far greater, something that would soon move everyone to tears. The following week began like any other. The guard didn't notice that something was different in the building. People seemed friendlier, smiling at him more often. The cleaning crew greeted him with warmth, and even the day staff who usually rushed past stopped to say hello. He didn't know why, but it made him feel quietly happy. That night, as usual, he began his rounds. The corridors were silent, and the sound of his shoes echoed softly against the marble floor. He checked every door, every hallway, the way he always did. When he reached the main hall, he stopped. The grand piano stood exactly where it always did, shining faintly under the soft lights. It had become like an old friend to him now, a companion that listened without judgment. He placed his flashlight down and walked toward it, his heart already starting to beat a little faster. As he sat on the bench, the familiar chill of the keys met his fingertips. He pressed one note gently and the sound floated across the hall, sweet and soft. Then another and another until the melody began to flow. He played with his eyes closed, letting the music guide him. Tonight the song was slower, a memory of the past. It spoke of love and loss, of time that could not be turned back. Every note carried the weight of years gone by. He didn't notice that someone had turned on a small light near the back of the hall. The director stood there quietly, watching. Beside him were a few people, staff members, a couple of musicians, and even one of the cleaners. They had gathered silently, not to surprise him, but to witness something that had become precious to all of them. For a while, no one moved. The only sound was the music drifting through the air like a soft wind. Some of them had tears in their eyes. It wasn't because the song was sad, but because it was so honest. It reminded them of their own memories, their own forgotten dreams. When the last note faded, the guard opened his eyes. He froze when he saw the small group of people standing there. His first instinct was embarrassment. He stood up quickly, his voice stumbling. "I'm sorry," he said. "I didn't mean to." But before he could finish, the director stepped forward. "Don't apologize," he said kindly. "You've given this place something beautiful." The guard looked at the ground, unsure how to respond. The director smiled and said, "Would you come in early tomorrow evening? I'd like to talk to you about something." He nodded slowly, still confused, and gathered his things. The rest of the night felt long, his mind spinning with questions. What did the director want to talk about? Had he done something wrong? The next evening he arrived early as asked. The director met him in his office, a small room filled with posters of past concerts and framed photographs of famous musicians. The guard stood quietly as the director poured 2 cups of coffee. "You've worked here for many years," the director began. "You've kept this building safe and cared for it as if it were your own. I've always appreciated that." "Thank you, sir," the guard said politely. The director leaned forward slightly. "But there's something else. I've heard you play the piano, and I think others should hear it too." The guard's eyes widened. "Oh, no, sir. I can't. I just play for myself. I'm not—" The director raised a hand gently. "Listen. This hall has hosted many great artists, but few have played with the kind of emotion you bring. You remind us what music really is. Not performance, but feeling. Next week, we're holding a small charity event for the community. I want you to play one piece." The guard shook his head immediately. "I'm not ready for that. I don't even remember how to play properly. You don't need to be perfect," the director interrupted softly. "You just need to be honest. That's what moves people." The guard fell silent. His hands trembled slightly as he held the coffee cup. The idea of playing in front of people scared him more than anything. He had spent years in the background, unseen and quiet. To step into the light now felt impossible. "I appreciate it," he said finally, "but I'm not sure I can." The director smiled kindly. "Think about it. You have a gift. Don't hide it forever." That night, as he made his rounds, he couldn't stop thinking about it. The idea scared him, but it also stirred something deep inside. The thought of sitting on that stage, really on that stage, not just sneaking to the piano at night, made his heart pound. When he reached the piano, he sat for a long time without playing. He stared at the keys, remembering his mother's voice, the way she used to encourage him. "Music is meant to be shared," she once said. "Even one song can touch a heart." He closed his eyes and smiled faintly. Maybe this was her way of reminding him. He started to play. Slowly, softly, the melody filled the hall again. It was the same song he used to play for her when he was a child. The one she loved most. As he played, he imagined her sitting nearby, nodding along. For the first time, he began to believe that maybe, just maybe, he could do it. Over the next few nights, he practiced quietly after his rounds. He tried to polish the piece, though he knew it didn't have to be perfect. What mattered was the feeling. Still, he wanted to do his best. The piano keys had become his companions, the sound his comfort. A few of the staff who had heard about the director's plan stayed late to listen. They didn't say much, but their quiet support gave him courage. Each night his hands grew steadier, his confidence a little stronger. Finally, the day of the charity event arrived. The hall was filled with soft lights and rows of chairs. It wasn't a big crowd, just local families, a few musicians, and community guests. The atmosphere was warm, not formal. People were chatting, smiling, unaware of the surprise waiting for them. Backstage, the guard sat alone, hands shaking slightly. He wore his uniform, freshly pressed. He thought about backing out, telling the director he couldn't do it. But when he heard the gentle murmur of the audience, he took a deep breath and stood up. The director came over and placed a hand on his shoulder. "You'll do fine," he said softly. "Just play like you always do, from the heart." When his name was announced, there was a small murmur of confusion among the audience. A guard? They expected another musician, not someone who watched the building at night. He walked slowly onto the stage, the lights bright in his eyes. The room went quiet. He sat at the piano, took a deep breath, and let his fingers touch the keys. At first, his hands trembled and the first few notes were uncertain. But then as he looked at the piano, something inside him calmed. He wasn't in front of a crowd anymore. He was back in the empty hall, surrounded by peace. The fear faded. His heart took over. The melody began to grow. It filled the room, soft at first, then stronger. The sound carried warmth and sadness, joy and memory mine all at once. Every note was a story, every pause a breath. The audience sat still, completely silent, as if afraid to move. The guard didn't think about technique or perfection. He thought about his mother, about the long nights of loneliness that the piano had filled, about the people who had listened quietly and found comfort in his music. By the time the final note faded, there wasn't a sound in the room. For a moment, he thought he had done something wrong. Then he looked up and saw tears in people's eyes. The silence broke into gentle applause that grew louder and louder. He didn't know what to do. He smiled shyly and bowed his head. The applause continued until the director walked up and shook his hand. "You moved them," he whispered. "You moved all of us." The guard walked off the stage, his heart full. He didn't feel like a performer. He felt human, real, alive. That night, after the event ended, many people came up to thank him. Some said his music reminded them of lost loved ones. Others said it gave them peace. Each word filled him with quiet joy. Later, when the hall was empty again, he stood alone by the piano. The moonlight fell through the tall windows just like the first night he found it. He touched the keys one last time and whispered, "Thank you." The piano didn't answer, but somehow, it felt like it smiled back. He turned off the lights and left the hall, his footsteps soft, his heart light. The city outside was quiet. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like just a guard. He felt like someone who had shared a piece of his soul, and the world had listened. Days after the charity night, the building seemed to carry a new kind of energy. The people who worked there walked with softer steps and kinder smiles. The echo of the guard's piano still seemed to linger in the hall, like a quiet whisper that refused to fade. He came to work as usual, though something inside him felt different. The night air felt lighter, the silence warmer. For the first time, he didn't feel invisible. When he passed the reception desk, the day staff greeted him not just with polite nods, but with genuine warmth. "You played beautifully," one of them said. He smiled shyly and thanked her. It still felt strange to hear those words. For so long, he had lived in the shadows, doing his job quietly, unnoticed. Now people looked at him with respect, not for the uniform he wore, but for the music that had come from his heart. The director called him into the office later that week. There was a new light in the director's eyes. "Your performance touched many people," he said. "We've been getting letters from guests who attended the event. Some of them said your music reminded them of home, of childhood, of hope. You gave them something real." The guard listened, humbled. He didn't know what to say. The director leaned forward. "We'd like to hold another small concert next month, this time for the staff and their families. Would you be willing to play again?" He hesitated for a moment. The thought of performing still made him nervous. But then he remembered the way people had listened, the way their eyes had softened. He realized that it wasn't really about performing. It was about sharing, about connecting. He nodded slowly. "Yes, I'll play." In the weeks that followed, the hall became a place of quiet preparation. Whenever his duties were done, he practiced a little, sometimes alone, sometimes with a few curious listeners who would sneak in to watch from the doorway. The music began to take on a new tone, softer, lighter, like sunlight breaking through clouds. One evening while he was playing, a young boy appeared at the far end of the hall. The boy looked about 8 or 9 with curious eyes and small hands clutching a backpack. He stood there listening, not saying a word. When the guard stopped, the boy walked closer. "That was beautiful," the boy said quietly. "My mom says you're the man who plays the piano here." The guard smiled. "Is that so? Do you like music?" The boy nodded eagerly. "I want to learn to play too. But we don't have a piano." The guard looked at the old instrument in front of him. He could see himself in that boy. The same spark, the same longing. "Would you like to try?" he asked. The boy's eyes widened. "Really?" "Come here," the guard said kindly. The boy climbed onto the bench beside him. The guard guided his small fingers over the keys, showing him how to press them gently. A clumsy note rang out, followed by another. The boy giggled, and soon the hall was filled with laughter and small uneven sounds that were more joyful than perfect. When the boy left, his mother came to thank the guard. She told him her son had been shy and quiet since his father passed away, but tonight he had smiled more than he had in months. After they left, the guard sat for a long time, staring at the piano. He realized that music wasn't only about sound, it was about healing. It could reach places that words never could. Word spread about what had happened. A few weeks later, more children began visiting the hall with their parents. Some wanted to see the guard who played the piano. Others wanted to hear him perform again. The director decided to open the hall one evening a week for community visits, allowing families to come and experience the music together. At first, the guard wasn't sure how he felt about it. But when he saw how people reacted, how they sat quietly, holding hands, sometimes crying softly, sometimes smiling, he knew it was worth it. Each night, he told small stories before he played, about how he had found the piano, how it reminded him of his mother, how it had helped him through lonely nights. People listened, not just with their ears but with their hearts. The hall became more than a building. It became a place of connection. One evening, as he played a gentle tune, he noticed the director standing in the doorway with a visitor. When he finished, the director approached with the man. "This is someone I'd like you to meet," the director said. "He's from a local music foundation. They support community musicians and offer lessons to children who can't afford them. He heard about you and wanted to see you play." The guard was speechless. The man shook his hand warmly. "You have a gift," he said. "Not just your playing, your heart. You remind people what music is really for. I'd like to help you if I can. Maybe we can work together, bring music to more people who need it." The guard felt overwhelmed. He had never imagined something like this. But deep down he knew what his answer would be. He didn't need fame or money. He just wanted to share the gift that had once saved him. "I'd be honored," he said softly. From that moment on, things began to change slowly, but beautifully. Every few weeks, the guard and the foundation organized small gatherings in different parts of the city, parks, community centers, and even hospitals. He would bring an old keyboard, sometimes borrowed, sometimes donated, and play for anyone who wanted to listen. Children gathered around, some dancing, some simply watching with wonder. The guard taught them a few simple notes, encouraging them to create their own songs. He didn't teach them to be perfect. He taught them to feel. In every place he visited, people remembered him, not as a performer, but as the kind man who made music feel alive again. Back at the hall, life continued quietly. The piano remained his closest friend. On nights when everyone had gone home, he still played alone. Not because he had to, but because it brought him peace. Sometimes when he played, he would think of his mother. He could almost see her sitting near the stage, smiling proudly. Other times he thought of the boy and the joy on his face when he pressed his first note. Those moments became treasures in his heart. Years passed, but the story of the guard who found the piano never faded. Visitors would come and ask about him. Some even brought flowers or small gifts, leaving them near the piano as a quiet thank you. The director eventually retired, but before he left, he told the staff, "Never move that piano. It belongs here, a reminder that even in silence, beauty can be found." And so it stayed. The guard grew older, but his hands never lost their gentleness. Even when his hair turned gray and his steps slowed, he still came every evening. People sometimes wondered why he never left, never tried to do more with his talent. But he didn't need more. The hall was his world, and his music had already reached where it needed to go, into the hearts of others. One late winter night, when the air outside was still and cold, he sat alone at the piano. The moonlight poured through the windows, casting silver across the keys. He began to play the same song he had played years ago, the one that first moved everyone to tears. The sound was slower now, softer, but still full of life. Every note carried his story, of loneliness, discovery, courage, and love. As he finished, he looked up and smiled faintly. The hall was quiet again, but it didn't feel empty. It felt alive. He stood up slowly, turned off the lights, and walked toward the exit. Before leaving, he looked back one last time. The piano stood there in the dark, gleaming faintly as if it remembered too. The guard whispered, "Thank you for everything." And as the doors closed behind him, the faint echo of his last melody lingered in the air, gentle, eternal, and full of peace. In the days that followed, people continued to visit the hall. The piano became a symbol of hope. Some said they could still hear faint music late at night when the building was empty. Whether that was true or not, no one could say. But everyone believed it. The legend of the guard and the piano spread quietly across the town, told from one heart to another. And in every version of the story, the message was the same, that kindness, courage, and love can be found in the most unexpected places. The man who once walked the hallways unseen had left behind something that would never be forgotten.